Hey, what's up YouTube? In this video, like the title says, we're going to be replacing the rear wheel bearings on the 280Z. So in my case, I'm redoing the diff. As you can see here, I've got all the parts on the table, and at the same time I've got the diff out, all the axles are out. Doing a whole diff upgrade and axle upgrade, and as part of that we're going to replace the rear wheel bearings. I'm going to have a video coming up on this whole rebuild. I'm putting an LSD in this R200 and also upgrading to the Z31 turbo axles. They're not here yet, but I just want to let you know that that is coming. Like I said, this video we're going to go through the process of changing out the rear wheel bearings. So I wasn't noticing anything necessarily wrong with them, but you know, as far as I can tell, and I've already taken the other side off, they're OEM to the car, so they're in need of being replaced. Already taken apart this side so that I understand when I'm explaining to you basically what's going on. This is what it's going to look like. I've got the lugs on this side, and then if you're looking from under the car to the wheel, you're going to have a oil ring. This comes off. It's basically rubber with some metal inside for reinforcement. So it'll be an oil ring, bearing, spacer, and then another bearing down there. The spacer comes off. It's kind of stuck. So this would be considered the inner bearing. This would be the outer bearing because it's closest to the wheel. So yeah, that's just basically what we're going to be taking apart here. So I'm going to show you under the car all the steps that you need to do that. Okay, so I've obviously got a rear disc brake conversion kit on this car. So it's not OEM, but I still think you're going to be able to understand the process to change the wheel bearings, even though everything might not look the same. So you still got to take the wheel off, still got to pull the axle off, which I've done. It's just 4 bolts back there and you can slide it back. I've got the diff removed, so all of that's done. You've got a drum brake, you'll hit the top off, and you're going to be exposed to the centerpiece here. So basically it's just a free floating disc here, and I'm going to go ahead and pull the spacer, the rotor off, and then we're going to get to the part of dealing with the nut on the backside. Okay, so now we're just left with this, and again, you might have a brake shield and the drum on, but the process is still going to be the same. So we've got this left, and now we're going to go to the backside and look at the nut that's back there. Okay, so this is the backside. As you can see, there's a nut here, and there's the normal piece that looks like, you know, your traditional nut. But then there's this straight edge right here, and that is basically because the top side of this nut is crimped onto the bolt. Okay, not the greatest example anymore because I've beat on it with a hammer, but you see that ridge there at the top? Just imagine that that is a ridge that went all the way around, and over here on the side it's straight, and so it's crimped onto that bolt, and you have to go in there with a cutting disc and cut the straight part off. So you're getting rid of that crimp so that the bolt will spin off of that nut freely. So you just need to cut where it's straight. You can see my cutting marks, and then you'll be able to torque it off with an impact. So I'm gonna cut it off, and then I should be able to show you a better idea. Okay, so you should be able to see that now. I've got the straight sides cut off there on both sides, and now we can just take our electric impact and hammer this off. I think you guys get it, but here's a better look. So you can see this raised edge right here, and you have to cut out the sides because that is where it's crimped. And then hammer it off just like I did. So that takes a little bit of time. Basically, I couldn't find anything other than a Dremel to work the best. It's the smallest. And little tip, if you are breaking the little discs, if you keep breaking them, double them up. That will help with that problem. I doubled mine up and didn't break on me. So now let's go ahead and go to the next step. Now we're ready to go ahead and pull the shaft out of the whole assembly. So this piece here with the wheel studs, that's all going to come out with a shaft, just like that over there. And basically I've got an angle iron here with a bunch of holes, drilled 2 holes to match the wheel studs. And it may or may not be necessary, but you know, I've got a slide hammer. That's what I'm going to use. You might not have to use it. So on the other side, I had a terrible time using the slide hammer and trying to pull it out this way. It just would not come. So what I found, or what I did, was I put this nut back on the back of the the threads that we just got off. I threaded it on a good ways so it had good engagement and didn't ruin the threads, and I hit it with a pretty heavy hammer from the back side and at least got it started. It started to move, and then once it was in too far where I couldn't really hit it with a hammer, I came out here and used the slide hammer the rest of the way. Now why I say you may not need a slide hammer is if you can slide a punch in from the back and you can basically punch it the entire way out. So different ways of doing it. I'm just gonna record myself doing it the method I did before, and we'll see how it goes. Finally got this side knocked out. It was a bit tougher on this side than the other side, but oh well, it did end up hammering out, and everything's good. So with this side, what's different than the other side is when I pushed out the shaft on this passenger side, both of the bearings stayed in this assembly right here. So the outer and the inner bearing were both left in there, and then I just used a punch, stuck it in there, and hammered it out from the front side and the back side, which was easier. However, this driver's side, the bearing stayed on, and I didn't go get a bearing tool. I don't have a press and all these other mechanic things, so I used what I had available to me, and this is what I came up with. So I essentially tack welded the bearing to my vise here, both sides, to stabilize it, and I've been hitting on the side. I was getting a little frustrated, it wasn't working, but you can see that shiny metal back there. I am finally starting to get it to walk back. So I think this is gonna work to get this bearing off of there. Okay, so now that this outer bearing is off of the stub, we still have the inner bearing stuck in the housing. So we need to use a punch and punch that out. So this inner ring here needs to be punched out. And there's two little openings here in the side that allow you to easily punch on that bearing inside of here. So just use a punch and you can punch it out the back. This piece here just falls right off. Once you hammer out that shaft, this just, you know, comes off very, very easily. So now we'll just hammer out that bearing and then we'll move on to the next step. But before we knock out the bearing, we do need to remove this seal. And you can use a screwdriver to pry it out, or maybe some vice grips and bend and pull it out. Just any way to kind of get under this rubber seal and just pry it on out. Now it's all clear in there, all the bearings removed. You can see how little grease is actually in there. You can see the condition of this grease here. It's not good. Not good, and there's just really nothing in there. It's like dry. So we'll be packing that up with a lot of grease. And one thing to note too is don't try and hammer that bearing out without taking that rubber seal out from the back. I think it's I tried it and couldn't skip that step, so you got to take the seal off, rubber seal, and then the bearing will come out. So just a little note. I'll get this all cleaned up, spray some brake clean in there, clean all the old stuff out. I'll use some Scotch-Brite or steel wool and clean up all of the mating surfaces front to back, get everything real nice and clean for our new bearings. Now that we got the bearing off of this, I'm going to clean up these surfaces with some steel wool. Probably get down in here with a wire brush and just clean up some of these areas. There's not any grooves on it, but just kind of take those markings out and clean it up a little bit. And then I'm going to put it in the freezer overnight to freeze it. Should compress just a little bit, make it a bit easier to slide the new bearing on tomorrow. So I'm going to get that done, and I'll see you tomorrow when this thing's nice and cold and we're ready to push on the new bearing. Just pulled the wheel stub, I guess you could call it, out. It's getting a little frosty. It is cold. This is what the new bearing looks like. Got the oil seal on this side and open bearings on this side. The oil seal will face down if you're looking at it from this angle, or you can think about it when it's on the car, it will face out towards the wheel. So that is that. Here's the part number for this one. I'll post up all of my part numbers that I bought from Rock Auto to do this job. Not the cheapest thing, but not the most expensive tune-up, you know. So again, oil seal is going to go down like this. I built this wood block with a hole. Basically just 2x4, drill the hole in it, and it will slide down on this pretty perfectly. And I'm going to use this to hammer it down. And I have this piece of roll cage tubing to, whenever the bearing starts getting down further, I can use this to hammer that wood down. Probably don't have to use the wood, but wood is a lot easier on the surface of the bearing than using metal to metal. So that's what I wanted to do. And then, you know, by using that, I can keep the weight centered rather than hitting each side of the wood. So you'll see me do that here, and hopefully it goes on smoothly. So the bearing's all the way down there, seated all the way against the bottom. See that? Side did go on a bit tougher than the other side. I did mean to put some, just any, this is tool oil, but meant to put some kind of oil to lubricate it. I did that on the other side. It did not take as many hits as this did. So I forgot to do that, but either way, it's on there now. So now I'm going to go ahead and pack this bearing with grease. And this is just some multi-purpose grease. It's got wheel bearings on there, so this is what I'm going to use. You guys can use whatever you want. I don't know, I just picked this up at the automotive store. So I'm going to get these packed full of grease. We'll get some grease on this spacer. That'll slide right on top. And then we'll go ahead and install the next bearing, which is this part number. And this would be the inner bearing. And for this one, make sure you saved your old bearing, clean it up a little bit, put some of your new grease on it, because this is going to be your press to press in this bearing here. So you'll be hammering on this one to get the new one in. Okay, everything's all greased up. You can see this is highly greased. I spent several minutes pushing the grease into that bearing, spinning it around. Put some grease on the shaft, put some grease inside the spacer. The spacer is on there, so this is ready to go. This is the inner bearing. Spent several minutes also pushing grease into that bearing, front and back side, making sure spinning it. You know the deal. And this is the old bearing that came out. I put some new grease, cleaned it off, put some new grease on it, so when I'm hitting it, it doesn't push and get the old nasty dried up grease into my new setup. So I'm going to go ahead and get under the car, and from the back side here, forgot to mention, my housing is totally clean. I cleaned all the old grease out, used brake cleaner, cleaned everything out, used Scotch-Brite on all of the metal surfaces, cleaned those up, and then also filled it with grease. So that cavity on the inside, the whole thing is caked full of grease. So it's all greased up. Now I'm going to put the new bearing in there, center it, and then I will take the old bearing, set it on top, and just start hitting that with a big hammer. Okay, now while we're back here, I'm going to put in the grease seal. We're going to use the bearing, the old bearing like we just did, to press it in. I'm going to wipe this off a little bit. I'll wipe it off after I get this seal in. I just start it kind of by hand. Now that it's flush with the metal ring in here, I have to use the old bearing just like before. Okay, now that the inner bearing, which is back here, and the seal is on, we can go ahead and slide this back in. And Should go in fairly smoothly. I've got a piece of wood here that I'm just going to use to tap on the front side of this to help it and persuade it to go in. Okay, and that looks to be fully seated. Okay, now that we've got the grease seal on, we can go ahead and put the new axle nuts on. These aren't exactly the OEMs that came on the Datsun, but these did come on later year Nissans, so these are self-locking. They're tapered, I believe, is the design to help lock them on to the threads, whereas the previous design, as you know, they had to be crushed, so that eliminated the ability for them to come loose. So we don't have to crush or crimp these just self-tighten and self-lock. However, we're going to use Loctite on these as well. So I'm going to start with using my Cobalt Impact. My Cobalt Impact can probably do around 150 foot-pounds, 100 to 150. So I'm going to use the Impact on that to get it started, and then I'm going to use this Impact to get it the rest of the way, which is the book says, and I don't remember exactly, but it's between like 185 to 220 foot-pounds, somewhere in that range. I'm just going to split it right in the middle, do 200, and we'll use some Loctite, and we'll be able to wrap this job up. Okay, we just got to put the hub back on. My hub might look a little different because I welded an adapter to it to do my axle upgrade, but process is still the same. This is the original hub. We're just going to slide this on. Yep, go ahead. There it is. All right, let me do it one more time. Okay, and I forgot to mention, in order to obviously get that torque wrench on there, I had the brake held by my helper, and so I have, you can push the brake pedal. I have a Hydro e-brake, so she pulled up on the Hydro, and that made it really easy. They held that very strong. So yeah, it was 200 foot-pounds, got it cranked. Actually, the Cobalt was very, very close. I'm surprised. It probably didn't turn very much. So all right, well, that completes the wheel bearing install. Got all nice new wheel bearings. Hopefully this video was informational. I'll insert a clip now of the wheel spinning freely. I'm happy with it. I've got to tighten down the spacer, and yeah, we are good to go. I hope you guys enjoyed, learned something, gives you some insight on what you need to do to replace your wheel bearings. And yeah, you can tackle it yourself now. All right, see you next time.